Hi everyone, welcome to today's 30 on Thursday webinar where we will be talking Wherefore Art Thou SharePoint On-Premise versus the Cloud versus Office 365 deployment options. So today's session is being recorded. It will be posted on sharepoint.protiviti.com/archived webinars where you can find recordings of all of our past sessions as well. If you have any questions during the presentation, please insert them in the question window in your GoToWebinar panel. We will get to all the questions at the end of the presentation today. We are hosting a couple of SharePoint Roundtables coming up. The topic will be What's New in SharePoint 2013. If you are near any of these cities listed, please join us for a complimentary breakfast and a live demo of SharePoint 2013. You can register for any of these events at sharepoint.protiviti.com/roundtables. If you're interested in any of our online courses coming up, there's a list on the screen. We are focusing on responsive design, Nintex, business intelligence, and upgrading to SharePoint 2013. You can register or learn more about any of these courses on our website as well. So for today's session, the topic is Wherefore Art Thou SharePoint On-Premise versus the Cloud versus Office 365 deployment options. Today's presenter is Terry Simpson, Solution Architect here at Protiviti, and I am Julia Oates. I will be moderating today's session. So let's get started.
Thanks, Julia. So for today's session, what we're really going to talk about are three different areas, as Julie mentioned: Office 365, the private cloud, and on-premise. And it's an interesting conversation because a few years ago, it used to be that when you talked about the SharePoint environment, the conversation was strictly around, you know, do you need standard functionality or do you need enterprise functionality? It's expanded so much today that that's only a small piece of it. Now the environment and where it lives has been much more the conversation. So we're going to dive into some of the pros and cons of each of these and talk about, you know, your decision-making process overall. So for an Office 365 environment, some of the pros here are that it's really fast to set up, and it's really low cost to get into one of these environments. You simply go out, determine how many users you're going to have, sign up, and you've got a site provisioned. You don't have to worry about maintaining any of the server side stuff. It's really kind of a pay-as-you-go model. So if you stand up an environment, you use it for 6 months, 8 months, or a year, and you decide that you want to turn it off, you can turn it off at any point. So a lot of benefits there. Very scalable, and you get a lot of bundled services that come with Office 365. Obviously, we like to focus on SharePoint because that's what we build, you know, our websites on, but you get a lot of other things with that, with Outlook and Link and the other things that come along with it. So a lot of benefits to it. But there are a few downsides as well. You don't have access to the server. You're in an environment with other clients, and you don't have access to go and do a backup of the content database, or it's difficult to connect to external databases. There are some services that are available, but overall it can be difficult to do that. Migration can sometimes be challenging depending upon the scenario of where you're migrating from. So if you're upgrading from 2007 or 10 into SharePoint Online, potentially you may need some third-party products to do that. There are some other things like Performance Point that just aren't available in Office 365 yet, along with other functionality like the content search web part, which has been a really nice addition to SharePoint 2013 that's not quite available in Office 365 yet. So those are definitely some things to consider. And I think overall, from a security perspective, a lot of the CIOs that I have talked with feel like sometimes they're taking a little bit of a leap of faith going into this environment, just because there are a lot of unknowns about it, and there's somewhat of a security blanket knowing in an on-premise solution that you have kind of control of everything. But definitely some pros and cons here for the Office 365 environment. When it comes to the private cloud, what I'm referring to here is a scenario where you have a server that you have control of, but it's in a data center, so not a hosted solution like Office 365 where I'm on the same server as a bunch of other folks with their own SharePoint sites, but in a data center where you have access to the server and have access to the information that you're there. Some of the considerations that you'll want to think about in the private cloud are things like the monthly costs that are associated with it. How much space do I get for the cost that I'm paying for the environment? And also the service levels that you're going to get. So you have a lot of different providers that you can go out there and host with, but they all have different service level agreements. They all have different levels of technical support that come with the price that you pay for your monthly cost. And so those are some key differentiators when you go to look at those hosting providers to have a private cloud. Also, you need to think about, well, what are the terms if I cancel? And also, what are they going to help me out with if in the event that I need to cancel? So will they provide assistance migrating to another server, whether it's in your facility or another hosting provider? So those are also some things to consider when you get into this and to think about. So within the private cloud, there's a lot of benefits. There's very little service maintenance that you have to do because essentially that's what you're paying for the provider that's giving you the solution. You don't have to worry about the equipment, and for the most part, most hosting companies give you that kind of 99.999% uptime. Disaster recovery is typically taken care of. They do backups of the environments. You typically get a lot of speed and performance. You can get a lot of storage out of the environment that you need, and security typically isn't too much of an issue as far as from network perspective is concerned. There are a few cons because a dedicated environment is always more expensive than a shared environment. So when you go to look at a private cloud option, it's going to be more expensive on a per user basis most likely than something like Office 365 in most scenarios. And you need a little bit more technical knowledge because the servers that you're working on you're going to have access to. Most likely you're going to do the installation or maybe have them do the installation, but you need to kind of keep things up and together within that environment. So there's a little bit more responsibility within that. The third example that I want to talk a little bit about for today's session as well is an on-premise solution. And so when I refer to on-premise, the reason why I put this image up here is literally down the hallway you have a server room and you have that closet and you've got racks in there and you've got your servers. And so it's literally in your facility, that type of environment. You've got the AC units in there in that room, the electricity, the pipes coming in and out of the building, all that kind of on-premise solution. So that's what I'm talking about here. So with this solution, you also have some pros and cons here. You can get a lot of speed depending upon the pipe you have coming into your facility. You could put as many servers in there as you want from storage perspective, a lot of flexibility. You have access to the entire environment from the aspect of going down and physically getting involved with the servers there, getting access to them. And you really get to configure things kind of on your terms because you own it essentially. And so it's a definite benefit to you owning that environment. But on the flip side, one of the cons here as well is you own it as well, which means you have all the responsibility of that environment and the upkeep of it. So you definitely need a little bit more technical ability on staff, and if you don't have that technical ability on staff, you need to probably outsource that and have someone there who can handle all the networking issues that you may run into, the equipment. Uptime, I kind of put a question mark here because that really depends upon your facility and what you have going on. Do you have backup generators so if the power goes off that you've got something there to keep your environment up and running. Disaster recovery is another big thing here as well because you have to have a good plan. A lot of folks, sometimes they'll go and stand up their server, they get their site out there and launched, and sometimes forget about the disaster recovery option. So in the event that server, something happens to it, what are you going to do? How do you get that site back up? So these are all things that you kind of have to consider. In addition to the higher maintenance cost and really the overall responsibility, because it is a lot of responsibility to have those servers kind of on-premise and have everything in there that you're kind of accountable for. So a lot of pros and cons for both of these, or all three of these solutions. So essentially, I think what this boils down to really are two primary decisions here. Are you going to go into an Office 365 environment or an on-premise solution? And essentially, once you get into the on-premise solution, you can break that up into two aspects here, meaning a private cloud or literally on-premise in your own closet in your environment. And so those are kind of your decision points into the normal things that we used to talk about with, you know, do I need standard or enterprise version of a SharePoint environment? And so here are a couple things that I wanted to put in place that can really help out your decision. And so these are 10 items that really immediately you can start to look at an on-premise solution, whether it's in the private cloud or in your facility. So when it comes down to customizations, this is one of the things that you'll definitely want to consider. Because if you're doing a lot of Visual Studio Code, writing customizations, you may want to consider the on-premise solution in order to deploy those solutions out there. Because remember, you don't have access to the server in Office 365 to deploy those. So deploying solutions or things that you want to create can be more challenging in that environment. Now granted, you have the PowerShell and a lot of other tools that you have access to deploy certain things, but overall you want to consider that. If you're going to build an authentication provider like claims-based here, that's something that typically you want to look at an on-premise solution. Things like cross-site publishing. We talked about Performance Point just a second ago. So when it comes to business intelligence, if you're going to have a pretty dynamic build-out of a business intelligence platform, you definitely want to consider that because it's not just Performance Point, but a lot of times that data that's coming into that business intelligence that's driving that information can come from external sources, and that needs to be considered because can you get that information into Office 365? Customizing the user search experience is another thing that can kind of push you in that direction, along with alternate access mapping, shredded storage, and even usage reporting. And so those are all important things to really consider in your environment and kind of push you immediately into the on-premise solution. Here are a couple overall considerations to think about, like for instance Office integration. User access, you know, we're going to use Active Directory or claims-based authentication in order to get into that environment. That'll definitely steer you in one direction or the other. User experience does have some factor into this, but not as much as it used to because SharePoint 2013, and especially within Office 365, you have a lot of flexibility now within the design. So if you want to host a public-facing website in that environment, you can do that and you can brand it just like you could with an on-premise solution. Also integration with other applications, big consideration, connectivity, security, where's your data coming from. Overall, I like to look at this last bullet point as the big one, is the roadmap for your environment and really matching it up with your business needs. Because I see a lot of organizations that kind of dip their toe into SharePoint and say, all right, I have an intranet and we're going to start to store documents out here and collaborate and use a lot of the core functionality, which is wonderful. And so they begin in an Office 365 environment. But as the organization starts to mature and really understands all the business needs of the organization, you need to factor in, does that environment give me everything that I need as far as a solution and getting things out there. So definitely have those considerations in mind. Ultimately, what a lot of folks end up coming to the conclusion of or end up doing is having somewhat of a hybrid approach. And so if you're struggling with this decision of, do I go with Office 365 or do I have an on-premise solution? There are the benefits, the pros, the cons. You may want to look at a hybrid approach because you can definitely get a lot of value out of Office 365 with things like Office Professional Plus. You can get Link online, you can get Exchange online, and there's a significant amount of value in those three primary services that you get out of Office 365 just unto itself. Even if you take SharePoint Online out of the picture, there's a tremendous amount of value. And so you may have a hybrid approach where you have all the services of Office 365, but in addition, your SharePoint site itself may be in an on-premise solution. We even have a few clients that we work with that they leverage SharePoint Online within Office 365, and they have an on-premise solution as well, and they really determine the functionality that's appropriate for each of those locations. So for instance, with SharePoint Online, they may manage all of their documents there, the SkyDrive, a lot of the community chat, social functionality, they'll do all of that there. And then the core customizations may live over in your SharePoint on-premise solution. So in other words, they may choose to put the business intelligence kind of portal in the on-premise area and other custom pieces. So definitely you may end up in a scenario where you want to look at a hybrid approach for both of those. And ultimately, one of the things we really like to encourage you to do is definitely do your homework and try to figure out what the requirements are around your solution when you go to build out your SharePoint website, and really what you're going to need as far as that roadmap is concerned that we talked about before. So I have 2 links up here of 2 sites that I would recommend to look at when you're starting to do some of your homework. And one of the first things that you're going to run into is the question of, well, does SharePoint Online give me X functionality? And you're going to have to figure out, can it do this and can it do that? So this one is a site I like to encourage you to go visit, and it's SharePoint Online Services description. And as I scroll down the page here, you're going to see all of the Office 365 plans that are currently available. Most folks end up getting into an E1, E3, or E4 type of category right here in the middle, whether it's education, government, or the regular enterprise plan that's in here. But what I love about this site, it's a really, really long page. There's a ton of content, but it goes in and actually tells you all the services or features that are available for each of these plans. So we talk about business connectivity services. Well, business connectivity services is available, but not all items within there are available depending upon the plan that you have. And so you can get in here and see some of this information. And you can really drive into all the feature sets that are in SharePoint and discover if they're available or not. So I really like to use this as a reference point for you in your decision-making process, not only to help you determine what level of the plan that you need, but also what environment that you want to go into. And I use this all the time, and I get in here, and I'll just do a quick find here for things like search. And come in, and someone may say, well, what all do you get with search? And I'll start clicking through the options here, and I see, we get SEO, filtered search, and then we get into all the search features down here, and I see content search web part. It's not available in Office 365, although the core enterprise search functionality is. So it's a good example of what you can find there. The other thing that's on this page, as I'm going to scroll down through here, and I'll point out real quick, it breaks it up into categories. We're looking at site features in this section, whereas if we come down a little further, you'll see all the social features. And I'm scrolling way too fast, so let's get back up on the page here. Bear with me just a second. So we can come in here and see all the social features. So ask about me and the blogs, all the social features included right out of the box here. So we see those. And then, well, we get into the add-ons, but if you come down here a little further on this particular page, this will also help you out with your on-premise decision. So these are the on-premise solutions. Now remember, when I talk about on-premise solutions, we're talking about on-premise as in literally in the closet down the hallway, and also in a hosted facility. And so this gets into the decision point of, are we using standard or enterprise, and what features come along with that as well. So this one page has a tremendous amount of information in it as far as the feature sets are concerned. And I like referencing this because it's continuously updated as new features are put out there. So this is another thing to factor in, is that with Office 365, that is the environment that SharePoint 2013 was really built for. SharePoint 2013 wasn't built for the on-premise solution. It was built to be able to work in the Office 365 environment. And so that is the focus for new feature sets when they come out in most situations. So when we talk about Yammer integration and the Yammer web parts and federation and all those new feature sets, a lot of that functionality you're going to see exposed in Office 365 first, and this is a great place to come and look at the feature sets to see if they're available or not available yet. The other link that I had in there was to this site here, which is a white paper on Office 365. And I like this white paper because it talks about hybrid environments and a lot of things that you need to think about. And it's federation, shared sources here, the designing of the environment, planning your navigation. It's just a great document as far as having a hybrid environment, a lot of things that you need to consider. So I'll put this back up for you to take a look at these links real quick, and you can also go out and do a Bing search real quick and find these as well. So I encourage you to do a little bit of homework within each of these and really match up the business needs. And that's essentially one of the things that you need to factor is there are a lot of decision points, and not every organization is going to fit into an Office 365 environment in a real nice way, and not every organization is cut out to have an on-premise solution. So I think you need to factor in the business needs, consider all that before you kind of jump right into the scenario of which environment you're going to look at. And I've ran into a couple of situations where folks have just really gone out and made a quick decision to say, all right, I'm going with Office 365, and here we go. And we're going to start building out their site, and they get started, and then all of a sudden they decide or discover that there are some limitations in that environment. So I encourage you to think about those things as you look at what environment you're going to put your SharePoint website into. So from here, what I'd like to do is kind of open it up to some questions and or comments. So feel free to go into the chat area, or I should say the questions area of the site, and type in some questions for this particular environment, and we're more than happy to jump in and answer some of these questions. If you walk away from today's sessions and you have some questions afterwards, feel free to send myself or Julia an email, and we're more than happy to kind of follow up on those directly. So I'll take a minute here and pause and see if anyone has any questions that they want to ask. All right, so it doesn't look like we have too many questions on today's session. Well, hold on, here comes one just now. Here comes some more questions. All right, select the security, there you go. So we have a question about security, where it just says about security. So I'm not sure exactly in depth what the question is around, but when it comes to security in the Office 365 environment, you know, you're primarily using the accounts that you're going to set up there, and you're going to have to factor in some of the aspects of whether you're going to use your local Active Directory credentials, and you need that sync process in there. But I feel pretty confident in the security of the environment that's been set up, and I've had a lot of clients who've had a lot of success in it. Let's see here. Another question, claims-based authentication is not allowed in SharePoint in Office 365. And this is a challenging one because with claims-based authentication, you really need to build an authentication provider, and essentially when you build that authentication provider, you typically have in there, you know, the membership provider and the role provider. But when you go to deploy that, that's the question of how do you deploy that into the environment. And that's where the on-premise solution comes into play, because you have access to the server to be able to literally go out and deploy it into that environment. All right. So the next question here that we have is it Microsoft moving towards the cloud rather than on-premise for SharePoint installations? That's a great question, and it's a very common one that comes up. Obviously, SharePoint 2013 was built for Office 365, and there's a tremendous amount of investment in there. And it will continue to be, I think, in my opinion, a big focus of the way things are going. And as more functionality comes out, and as you can do more and more in that environment, it's going to become a more and more popular option. But I don't think on-premise is going to go away at all. I definitely don't think it's going to go away, because there's always a need for an organization to be able to have complete control of their environment, have the servers in their facility or in their hosted environment, and have access to do whatever it is that they need there. So I don't think the on-premise will ever go away. It should still be an option that's there, in my opinion. All right, let's look through a couple more questions. Getting a lot of questions now. All right, so what about workflows, web parts, and those kind of things? That's a good question here. So there's still a lot that you can do within Office 365 in those instances. So you have SharePoint Designer that's available. So if you want to go out and build workflows, you have the out-of-the-box workflows that are there and available. You can also go out and build more complicated workflows within SharePoint Designer. You don't have the ability to get a lot of Visual Studio workflows deployed out there, but there are also some third-party products that allow you to work in that environment as well, like Nintex. I'm a big advocate of using that for those workflows and those type of things as well into the environment. So there's a lot of flexibility in what you can do in those particular environments. So the last question I'll address here is more about housekeeping item of being able to send the slides in an email. So Julia has the slides, and she can email the slide deck out to you guys today and be able to have access to this particular one. Let me jump in. Let's see if we can get another question in before we run into the 2 o'clock hour. Could you elaborate on some of the business intelligent capabilities? Does it allow any of the basic reports at all? So this is a good question. Performance Point's the kind of the easy answer there, that it's not available, but other things are available. So if you want to use, for instance, like Excel services and Power Pivot, you can definitely use that within the Office 365 environment. So there are a lot of report capabilities when it comes to BI that you can generate reports and create views and do a lot of those things. The challenge is where the data is coming from, and I think that's kind of the root cause of what needs to be discovered, is where is the data? Is it in SQL? Is it in some type of association management system? Is it in an access database, ERP system? Where's it coming from, and how do you get access to it? Can I use web service calls? Because if you could use a web service call to get to it, you can leverage that in Office 365 to get access to the data, and potentially even write back and change some of that data as well. And that's really what the core of what we're getting at when we're trying to get access to information there. All right. So I think we've made it through the biggest piece of the questions here. So if I didn't get to your question, feel free to shoot us an email and we can follow up with you. And again, I appreciate everyone attending today's webinar, and look for the future webinars that are coming up. We do this every 2 weeks for 30 minutes on Thursday, and let us know if you have any topics of interest as well. And feel free to shoot Julie and I our email. So thanks for attending.